If you think you can just build over my land and get away with it, think again. The words echoed in my mind as I drove down the familiar gravel road leading to my property, the early morning air crisp with the scent of freshly turned earth and the lingering aroma of wet pine from the surrounding forest. Before we start the story, leave a comment telling us where you are watching from, and at the end don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10, enjoy the story. My name is Ethan Harper, 38, and for as long as I can remember, this 12-acre plot of rolling hills and oak groves had been the heartbeat of my family, a legacy passed down from my grandfather who had cleared and cultivated the land with nothing but sweat, determination, and a vision for a future that belonged to us. Today, that vision was under siege. The crunch of gravel beneath my boots quickened my pulse as I approached the cleared path where trees once stood, now replaced by heavy machinery, piles of dirt, and the sharp metallic scent of asphalt waiting to be laid. Maggie Thornwell, the HOA president, stood at the edge of the property in a crisp white blazer, her hair perfectly styled, the sunlight glinting off her silver bracelets as she waved toward the construction crew like a general surveying her troops. Her smile was polished, serene, almost too perfect, masking the cold certainty that she believed she owned the authority to carve a road straight through land that was not hers. I could see the survey stakes pushed into the ground at random intervals, a rough sketch of a path that cut across pastures where I had learned to ride horses, the soil still damp from last night's rain, and the subtle aroma of wet earth mixed with the sharp tang of fresh-cut timber hanging heavy in the air. Every instinct in me screamed against this invasion, the decades of family memories and painstaking care treated as collateral for someone else's ambitions. As I stepped closer, the vibration of the construction machinery reverberated through the soles of my boots, a low hum that matched the tension coiling in my chest. Dust swirled around me with each movement of the excavator, catching the morning light like suspended gold, and the faint smell of diesel mingled with the pine, a sensory assault that grounded me in the reality of what was being done. Maggie's voice carried over the noise, calm yet sharp, explaining permits, zoning, and community standards as if rehearsed for maximum effect, the words punctuated by the rhythmic clanging of metal stakes against the ground. The weight of injustice pressed down, not with physical force, but with the undeniable presence of someone taking what wasn't theirs, the sun warm on my back as if bearing witness to the audacity. I felt the rough bark of the old oak tree scrape my hand as I ran past it, a comforting anchor in the chaos, remembering my grandfather's voice, his advice to observe, to understand the land, and to act with precision. The smell of gravel dust and damp soil filled my nostrils as I surveyed the cleared swath of land, the jagged edges of uprooted roots jutting like silent witnesses, the distant call of a hawk slicing through the tension, and the whisper of wind carrying the promise that this wasn't the end, only the beginning of the fight to reclaim what was mine. The history of this land runs deeper than the surface gravel and newly carved road. Each morning as I walk past the ridge where the old stone fence once stood, I feel the imprint of my grandfather's hands in the soil, the memory of his careful measurements and the way he marked trees with notches to guide future generations. This was not just property, it was a chronicle of decades of planning, planting, and protection, a tangible record of dedication that had been passed from him to my father and now to me. The air carries the soft fragrance of wildflowers pushing through disturbed earth, a subtle reminder that life continues even amid intrusion. I glanced toward the small creek running along the eastern boundary, its waters still clear despite the construction upstream, reflecting the morning light like shards of glass. Each ripple reminds me of patience, the slow accumulation of work and care that cannot be replaced overnight. I stop at the edge of a cluster of oaks where the sound of machinery is muffled, the hum of distant engines fading into the natural chorus of birds and the occasional rustle of leaves. Here, I feel grounded, connected to the rhythms of this land, recalling summers spent learning to measure plots with wooden stakes, evenings watching fireflies hover over freshly mown fields, and the winter mornings where frost outlined every branch in crystalline lace. The gravel crunches under my boots as I make my way toward the barn, a small structure built with my own hands last year, each beam fastened with precision and care. Its scent of sawdust and aged wood is comforting, a tangible affirmation of my labor. I pause to inspect the perimeter, noting where the soil has shifted from heavy equipment and where construction debris lies scattered, a jarring intrusion into familiar patterns. The wind carries the faint tang of asphalt, and I can feel the subtle vibrations from distant machines as if the earth itself is alerting me to the changes. My eyes catch the faded markers where boundary lines were surveyed decades ago, still legible beneath the dust and leaves, symbols of legal certainty waiting to be acknowledged. I run my fingers along the wooden fence post, smooth from years of wear, and listen to the rhythmic cadence of my breath, steadying the rising tension. In these quiet moments, I remember the teachings of my grandfather about patience, observation, and strategy, the way he said one must understand the land before acting, to see its hidden rules and natural tendencies. This is the legacy I carry, and every sense is attuned to it: the smell of earth, the sight of subtle changes in color and contour, the feel of the wood beneath my hands. I am not just observing, I am cataloging, preparing, understanding. The machinery may alter the surface, the road may claim space temporarily, but the history, the rights, and the care embedded in every inch of this property remain. I can almost hear my grandfather's voice reminding me that justice, like the land, moves slowly but inevitably, and that knowing the rules and the patterns is half the battle. As I step back, taking in the expanse of cleared earth and the encroaching line of asphalt, I feel a renewed resolve, a quiet determination shaped by years of connection to this land, ready to act with precision when the moment comes. As I stood near the barn, my eyes followed the neat lines of freshly driven stakes and the partially leveled soil, realizing that Maggie's crew moved with confidence as if the land had been theirs for years. The morning sun glinted off her clipboard, and she called out instructions with a tone that suggested certainty, her words carrying over the low hum of machinery, yet beneath that calm facade I could see the weight of overconfidence. I walked along the edge of the creek, observing how the water flowed undisturbed for now, its gentle murmur a stark contrast to the noise of the ongoing construction, reminding me that not all systems could be forced to bend under someone else's will. Each step on the damp grass revealed subtle changes from the night's work, small divots, displaced stones, and the scent of crushed pine needles that filled the air, grounding me in the reality that this was not merely a fight over land but over every memory etched into it. I noticed the markers where the road would intersect with old trails my family had used for decades, the familiar paths now encroached upon by freshly disturbed earth and the faint smell of asphalt and gravel mingling in the air. The distant calls of birds punctuated the mechanical noise, and I paused to take in the full scene, noticing how the morning light danced off the scattered equipment, casting long shadows across the uneven terrain. Maggie's gaze swept over the property like she was measuring it not just with instruments but with authority, a presence that challenged every inch of my inherited space. I examined the edges of the barnyard where my father had installed a small irrigation system, the pipe still intact but threatened by the advance of the new road, the smell of wet soil and metal sharp in my nostrils. I crouched near one of the oak groves, fingertips brushing over the rough bark, feeling the deep grooves and knots that had marked the seasons for decades, and reminded myself that these were my boundaries, not just in law but in legacy. The wind rustled the leaves with a soft, persistent sound, carrying the subtle fragrance of wildflowers and morning dew, and I let my mind trace the history of every corner, every stone, every slope, cataloging the land and its details as though preparing for a precise plan that would respect the integrity of all that had been built and nurtured. From this vantage point, I could see where the machines had cut through the earth, the uneven ridges of gravel awaiting the final layer of asphalt, and I felt the contrast between the temporary disruption and the permanence of the land's history. Every sense was alert: the crunch of gravel, the hum of distant engines, the faint tang of asphalt, and the scent of crushed pine formed a sensory map, each element a reminder of what was at stake and what would guide my next move to ensure that the legacy of this property would remain intact and that the presence of intrusion would not go unanswered. The crunch of gravel beneath my boots grew louder as I approached the heart of the construction, where the path of the new road cut through what had once been a gentle meadow dotted with wildflowers and low-growing shrubs. I could see the edges of tire tracks pressed into the damp soil, a reminder of the machines that had reshaped this land overnight, and the faint aroma of asphalt mixed with the earthy scent of crushed pine needles lingered in the air. Maggie moved among her crew with practiced precision, clipboard in hand, issuing instructions with the kind of calm authority that made it seem as though every decision had already been sanctioned by the universe itself. Her voice carried clearly across the morning air, punctuated by the rhythmic pounding of stakes and the metallic scrape of surveying equipment, and yet beneath that polished exterior I could sense the overconfidence that comes from assuming control without consequence. I stepped closer, running my hand along a boundary marker, feeling the rough surface of weathered wood beneath my fingertips and tracing the faint notches that had once marked the edges of my grandfather's carefully measured plots. The sunlight filtered through the canopy of oak and maple, highlighting patches of grass that had been trampled but not yet disturbed by the heavy machinery, and I noticed how small animals darted from the newly cleared areas into the thicker undergrowth, their movement quick and silent, a subtle signal that the natural order was adjusting to human interference. I walked along the perimeter of the clearing, paying attention to the subtle rise and fall of the land, noting where water would naturally pool during rain and where the slope would channel runoff toward the creek, the soft gurgle of water over rocks a constant reminder of the life that existed independent of human plans. The distant call of a hawk echoed through the trees, cutting across the hum of machinery, and I inhaled deeply, letting the combination of fresh pine, damp earth, and asphalt fill my lungs and sharpen my senses. Each detail was a data point, each scent and sound a clue to the character of the land and the patterns it had established long before any construction crew arrived. Maggie's presence loomed over the scene, her posture perfect, her gaze sweeping over the cleared path, but I remained focused on the textures underfoot, the subtle indentations of roots and stones, and the long shadows cast by the morning sun across the newly disturbed soil. In these moments, observation became my tool, patience my ally, and the land itself my guide, teaching me the angles, the contours, and the hidden rules that would allow me to plan the steps necessary to ensure that every action taken in response to this intrusion would be deliberate, informed, and ultimately just. I allowed myself a quiet moment to catalog the changes, to note the small deviations from previous maps and surveys, and to imagine how the road would look once completed, all while mentally marking the evidence of overreach and the precise points where the legacy of this property demanded acknowledgement. The mixture of anticipation and resolve settled in my chest as I stepped back, taking in the expanse of the clearing and the machinery that moved like a silent tide, and I understood that every observation, every detail, and every careful measurement would soon become the foundation of a response that was both strategic and inevitable. The morning wore on with a tense rhythm, the low hum of machinery blending with the distant rustle of trees and the soft trickle of the creek along the eastern edge of the property. I paced the perimeter, tracing the line where the new road intruded into my land, my eyes scanning every stake, every footprint, and every subtle shift in the soil that marked the progress of Maggie's crew. The gravel dust clung to my boots and the smell of fresh pine lingered in the air, a reminder that even amidst disruption, the natural order persisted. I paused near the old barn, its timber beams holding the faint scent of sawdust from the last winter's maintenance, and observed the way sunlight hit the freshly disturbed earth, highlighting every uneven ridge and shadowed groove. Maggie moved through the clearing with deliberate gestures, her clipboard an extension of authority, yet I could see the slight tension in her posture, the way her steps faltered when a stray branch or uneven stone forced a pause. The juxtaposition of her confidence and the reality of the land's complexity reminded me that certainty built on assumption is often fragile. I walked along the newly flattened path, feeling the vibration of distant equipment underfoot, and mentally catalogued the changes, noting how each modification affected water flow, tree roots, and natural drainage patterns. The sound of birds, a hawk's piercing call, and the soft hum of the wind through the canopy created a backdrop of continuity, an invisible support that anchored my focus. I checked the edges of the property where old survey markers still stood, worn but legible, their placement confirming boundaries established long before any contemporary intrusion. Each detail was logged in my mind, from the slight tilt of a stake to the subtle difference in soil color where construction had shifted topsoil, and I understood that these observations would form the foundation of a measured response. I moved toward the creek, kneeling to touch the water and feeling the gentle flow over smooth stones, the faint scent of moss and wet earth filling my senses. In that moment, I felt connected to the long lineage of stewardship that had defined my family's relationship with this land, a responsibility to honor both memory and law. The sun climbed higher, casting light over the cleared path, and I could see the temporary nature of the disruption in contrast with the permanence of property rights and careful planning. Every inhale carried the smell of gravel, pine, and earth, every step resonated with the history beneath my boots, and every observation sharpened my resolve. Maggie may have assumed control of the surface, but the deeper structure, the legal and inherited knowledge, remained in my hands. I let the sounds, smells, and textures of the land imprint themselves into a detailed mental map, preparing for the moment when the temporary intrusion would meet the precision of deliberate action, ensuring that the legacy of this property would remain intact and that every decision made from here would be informed, strategic, and ultimately just. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, casting elongated shadows across the uneven terrain, I retreated to the old wooden deck behind the barn, letting my gaze sweep across the property from the tree line to the edges of the newly carved path. The hum of distant machinery persisted, but in the midst of it I found a rhythm in the patterns of soil, gravel, and the scattered wildflowers that had somehow survived the intrusion. I dug into the filing cabinet inside the barn, a sturdy metal structure with a faint scent of aged paper and wax polish, and pulled out a bundle of documents collected over decades, old surveys, boundary agreements, and permits that had long been filed away yet retained their legal weight. The crisp pages carried the faint aroma of ink and time, and I flipped through them carefully, noting the precise measurements and annotations made by surveyors and my grandfather alike, each mark a testament to meticulous planning and foresight. Among the files, I found correspondence from the county, letters confirming historical easements, and notes detailing water rights and property boundaries, all of which painted a picture of ownership that was clear, indisputable, and deeply rooted. I traced each line with my finger, imagining the surveyors walking these plots decades ago, their boots pressing into the earth just as mine had earlier in the day. The faint scent of pine and earth from outside drifted through the open barn door, grounding me in the tangible reality of the land itself. I realized that while Maggie may have believed she could redefine the property by placing stakes and machinery in her path, the documentation in my hands demonstrated a history and authority far more enduring. I spread the papers across the worn workbench, aligning the maps with the stakes outside, noticing how even small deviations in the construction could be cross-referenced against decades of verified data. Each detail confirmed the extent of the intrusion and revealed leverage points that could be used to assert legal control. I made notes in a small journal, the ink scratching lightly against the paper, recording observations and insights that would guide my next steps with precision. The sunlight through the barn windows highlighted the texture of the papers, the faint shadows of tree branches shifting with the wind, and for a moment I paused to take in the interconnectedness of land, history, and law. Every corner of the property, every marking on the documents, and every sense impression from the natural surroundings became part of a mental map, a blueprint for action that was both deliberate and unavoidable. I understood that knowledge and preparation were as vital as any physical presence on the land. Observing, recording, and correlating information had turned the intrusion into an opportunity, transforming the current challenge into a pathway toward reclaiming control and establishing a firm, unassailable position that would ultimately safeguard the property and honor the legacy entrusted to me. With the evidence meticulously organized on the workbench, I stepped outside to take a full survey of the land from the top of the small hill behind the barn, letting the morning light illuminate the stakes, gravel, and partially laid path of the road that had cut through my property. The scent of pine and fresh earth mingled with the faint tang of asphalt, forming a sensory map that helped me connect the physical intrusion to the documentation I had carefully assembled. I studied the trajectory of the construction, noting each point where the stakes deviated from the historical boundary lines, imagining how a legal argument could align these observations with the formal records in my hands. Each subtle ridge and depression in the soil became a marker, each displaced stone a testament to the unauthorized expansion, and I visualized how to present this to the county surveyor and the legal authorities with precision. I revisited the barn to retrieve measuring tools, cameras, and maps, ensuring every piece of evidence was accounted for and cross-referenced, the smell of aged paper and ink grounding me as I moved with purpose. As I walked along the path of the road, I marked locations for photographic documentation, the crunch of gravel underfoot echoing across the clearing, while the soft rustle of leaves and distant calls of birds created a calm counterpoint to the tension of the encroachment. I paused near the old oak trees, running my fingers over the bark, imagining my grandfather walking the same route decades ago, his steps measured, deliberate, and careful. These trees, these markers of time and stewardship, reinforced the narrative that the land was not merely a commodity but a living chronicle of dedication, and that any action to alter it without acknowledgement was not only presumptuous but legally untenable. I moved toward the creek, kneeling to feel the gentle flow over smooth stones, the cool water reminding me that natural systems were patient and persistent, much like the approach I was planning. Every observation, every detail, every note recorded in the journal built a comprehensive picture of the situation, preparing me for the strategic steps ahead. I considered the placement of stakes, the alignment of machinery, and the points where photographs could illustrate the intrusion most clearly, all while imagining how a methodical presentation of facts would render the unauthorized road unmistakably illegal. The interplay of light, shadow, scent, and sound sharpened my awareness, and I felt the land itself guiding me, confirming the precision of my plan. By the time I stepped back to take a final view, the hum of distant equipment seemed less threatening and more like a rhythm to coordinate with, every element accounted for, every observation logged. I understood that patience, thoroughness, and careful documentation would turn the temporary advantage of construction into a decisive moment of justice, ensuring that when the formal challenge was presented, it would be not only compelling but unavoidable, and that the legacy and integrity of this property would be preserved beyond any immediate disruption. The first notice from the county arrived on a crisp envelope with the official seal catching the morning sun, its weight in my hands carrying the gravity of the moment. I opened it slowly, the faint scent of ink and paper rising as I read through the detailed documentation that confirmed my observations. The road construction had overstepped its bounds, violating established easements and infringing upon property lines backed by decades of recorded surveys. Each paragraph reinforced the careful work I had done to cross-reference every stake and every survey marker, the meticulous collection of evidence now translating into formal acknowledgement. I retraced my steps across the property, matching the points highlighted in the notice with the stakes in the ground, noting where the alignment of the road deviated from legal boundaries. The sunlight glinted off the metal survey tags, casting small reflections across the cleared earth, and I could hear the subtle whisper of wind through the treetops, almost as if the land itself was affirming the legitimacy of the claim. I prepared my folders with photographs, maps, and copies of historical documents, each item organized to demonstrate the precision of my research and the thoroughness of my record-keeping. I considered how each piece of evidence would tell a story, connecting the intrusion to a clear timeline of ownership and legal authority, the smell of paper and ink grounding me in the task ahead. Outside, the faint hum of the distant machinery had ceased, replaced by the natural sounds of the property, bird calls, rustling leaves, and the gentle flow of the creek, which underscored the quiet persistence of the land over human interference. I walked along the edge of the road, noting each place where construction had left an imprint, and I envisioned the presentation to the county officials, the way each photograph and document would align to create an unassailable case. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the clearing, illuminating the textures of soil, gravel, and displaced vegetation, emphasizing both the scale of the intrusion and the clarity of the evidence I now held. I paused at the old oak grove, fingers brushing over the bark, recalling my grandfather's lessons about careful observation and respect for the land, understanding that patience and diligence were now my most powerful tools. Each element, from the precise angles of survey stakes to the faint lines where earth had been disturbed, contributed to a coherent narrative that could not be ignored. The wind carried the mingled scents of pine, damp soil, and asphalt, sharpening my senses and reminding me that the temporary presence of machinery did not outweigh the enduring authority established in legal and historical records. As I compiled the final stack of documents and photographs, aligning each detail to the specific points of encroachment, I felt a sense of calm determination settle in, knowing that every careful observation, every measured note, and every tangible record was preparing the way for the inevitable resolution in my favor, and that the legacy of the property, cultivated over generations, would be upheld through deliberate, precise, and legally grounded action. The afternoon settled into a golden glow as I finally stood at the crest of the hill, surveying the entire property from the vantage point that had guided every decision and every observation for the past days. The road that had once cut so aggressively through the meadow now felt like a temporary scar beneath the sunlight, its straight edges and gravel hum a testament to a brief intrusion that had no claim on the enduring truth of ownership. I unfolded the maps and photographs across the workbench one last time, aligning every image with the survey markers and legal documents, watching the shadows of trees stretch across the pages as the sun shifted in the sky. The wind carried the mingled scents of pine, damp earth, and faint asphalt, reminding me that the natural rhythms of the land persisted despite human ambition. I walked the edges of the property slowly, each step reinforcing the boundaries that had been honored for decades, tracing the contours of the creek and the small rise where wildflowers bloomed, their persistence a quiet affirmation that the land itself bore witness to rightful stewardship. In the distance, I saw Maggie pause beside her now halted equipment, her posture slightly rigid, her hands resting on the clipboard as though the realization of legal limits had begun to settle. I felt a quiet satisfaction, the culmination of methodical preparation, careful observation, and patient strategy converging into clarity. I documented the final alignment, making note of every point where her plans had encroached upon the established boundaries, every deviation now serving as proof of the impermanence of her claim. The barn, still filled with the scent of sawdust and aged paper, stood as a repository of legacy and evidence, the tangible reminder that knowledge, diligence, and patience could outlast fleeting authority. I traced the worn paths along the meadows where my grandfather had walked, remembering his words about foresight and respect for the land, and felt the weight of stewardship settle comfortably across my shoulders. Each breath carried the crisp aroma of pine and the subtle warmth of sun-warmed soil, every sound, the distant call of birds, the rustle of leaves, the soft trickle of the creek, creating a layered soundtrack to the moment of resolution. I took a final look at the cleared path, the stakes, and the slight ridges of disturbed earth, knowing that while the machinery had passed through, the authority of documented ownership and careful planning now held unchallenged. Every measurement, every photograph, and every note had converged into an unassailable assertion of rights, transforming temporary intrusion into an opportunity for justice. As the sun dipped lower, casting a long, serene shadow across the land, I felt a deep, calm certainty, the legacy of the property, cultivated and protected across generations, would endure. The road that Maggie had built would remain a reminder not of conquest but of the patient, deliberate, and inevitable power of law, observation, and persistence, and I could finally stand among the oaks, listening to the whispering wind, and know that justice had been served.